The wind howled across the barren expanse of Draconis 4, sweeping up tendrils of ash and dust that coiled like phantom serpents in the crimson light of the dying sun. The planet had been marked as a forsaken world, its skies stained in hues of decay, its ground cracked from centuries of neglect. No one came here willingly. Yet, Dr. Alara Miles stood at the edge of a canyon, staring down into the abyss, her breath fogging against the cold as her scanner emitted a slow, rhythmic pulse. Life. She hadn't expected to find anything but silence when her ship, the Odyssey, landed on this forgotten rock. Her mission was to survey the planet for potential research outposts, but instead, her instruments had detected something far more interesting. Something massive. And now, standing at the precipice of the canyon, she saw it. A colossal form, lying motionless at the base of the crater. Its body was partially buried beneath layers of rock and dust, its once majestic scales dull and cracked, its enormous wings draped over the jagged ground like torn banners of a fallen empire. It was a dragon. Alara's heart pounded against her ribs. She had read about them in old records, starborn beasts of legend, revered by some, feared by others. The great winged monarchs who once roamed the stars had vanished centuries ago, their extinction believed to be inevitable. And yet, one lay here now, breathing raggedly, alive but barely so. Alara stepped closer, her boots crunching against the scorched earth. Her scanner flickered, the readings chaotic, unstable vitals, metabolic poisoning, and something else, something foreign. She narrowed her eyes, adjusting the wavelength of the scan. Then she saw it. Dark, pulsating barnacles clung to the dragon's scales, their twisted forms embedded deep into its flesh. They pulsed in sickly patterns, like parasites feeding on the creature's very essence. Alara clenched her jaw. This wasn't just decay. This was a curse. Her gaze flickered to the chains, ancient bindings wrapped around the dragon's limbs, fused to the very rock beneath it. Someone had done this. Someone had left it here to suffer. A deep, shuddering breath escaped the creature's maw, stirring the dust in the air. Then, slowly, agonizingly, its eyes cracked open. And the moment their gazes met, Alara felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken words press into her soul. The dragon's eyes were silver. Not just silver, living, liquid stardust, glowing faintly beneath layers of exhaustion. They focused on her with startling clarity, even as the weight of sickness threatened to drag them closed again. Alara knelt beside the massive creature, her hand tightening around her scanner. The barnacles were draining it, leaching energy like parasites that had evolved specifically to prey upon something as powerful as this. The dragon exhaled, a sound like shifting mountains. Then, to her absolute shock, it spoke. "You are not one of them." The voice rumbled through the air, deep and raw, edged with an exhaustion so profound that it seemed to settle into Alara's very bones. She hesitated, caught between awe and disbelief. The records had never mentioned that dragons could speak. "No," she said softly, "I'm not." The dragon studied her for a long moment before closing its eyes, its breath shuddering. "They are gone." The words were almost a whisper, filled with something that wasn't relief, wasn't sadness, just emptiness. Alara swallowed, glancing at the chains once more. "Who did this to you?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, "My people," the dragon rasped. Alara stilled. She had expected an enemy, a rival species, a cruel force that had captured a living legend and left it to rot. But its own kind had done this? "Why?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. The dragon's throat rumbled, an ancient sound filled with centuries of pain. "Because I would not let them break the stars." A chill ran down Alara's spine. She didn't understand what it meant, not yet, but she knew enough to recognize betrayal when she heard it. Alara stepped closer, running her scanner over the barnacle-infested wounds. Every reading screamed systemic shutdown, her HUD flashing with critical alerts. She had seen creatures suffer before, out in the frontier colonies, where war and famine left scars on every living thing. But this was different. This was deliberate cruelty. Her fingers tightened around her medkit. "I can help you," she said firmly. "I don't care what happened before or why they left you here, but I'm not leaving you to die like this." The dragon's silver eyes reopened, studying her with something unreadable. "You would offer aid to a dying queen." The voice murmured, "When the galaxy has abandoned me." Alara didn't flinch. "I'm a medic," she said simply. "Saving lives is what I do." A pause. Then for the first time, the dragon gave her its name. "I am Letharia," she whispered, last of the celestial queens. Alara exhaled slowly, the name settling into the air between them like a vow unspoken. She tightened her grip on her instruments. "All right then, Letharia," she murmured. "Let's get those damn things off you." And beneath the blood-red sky of Draconis IV, under the shadow of betrayal and ruin, a queen's fate shifted for the first time in centuries. The air around them was thick with decay, the scent of rot and rust mixing with the distant hum of a dying planet. Alara knelt beside the massive form of Letharia, her fingers tight around her medical scanner as she assessed the extent of the damage. The barnacles weren't just parasites, they were weapons designed to leach energy from the host while keeping them in a constant state of agony. Alara had seen bioweapons before. She had treated soldiers on the brink of death, their bodies riddled with nanite plagues and flesh-eating bacteria, but this was something worse. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted to kill Letharia. They had wanted her to suffer. The Dragon Queen's breath was slow, labored, her massive chest rising and falling in painful intervals. Her once glorious wings were pinned beneath the weight of her own body, unable to move, her talons curled inward from months, maybe years of imprisonment. Alara adjusted her scanner, recalibrating it to map the barnacle infestation. Her visor flickered with biometric readings, scrolling through lists of deteriorating organs and bioelectric fluctuations. If she didn't act soon, Letharia wouldn't last another rotation. The dragon's silver eyes cracked open again, her gaze heavy with exhaustion, but still sharp enough to pierce through Alara's soul. "You do not fear me," Letharia murmured, her voice like the distant echo of thunder. Alara exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't have time to be afraid." She reached for a sterile scalpel, activating its fine vibrational edge, then glanced at the largest of the barnacles latched onto the dragon's spine. She would have to cut them out, one by one. "Hold still," Alara instructed, positioning herself along Letharia's ribcage. "This is going to hurt." Letharia let out a slow, rumbling breath. "Pain is all I have known for a long time, human. Do what you must." Alara tightened her grip on the scalpel. She had dealt with fragile procedures before, performing surgery in the middle of war zones, patching up dying explorers who had been torn apart by unknown creatures. But this was on a completely different scale. The barnacles had rooted themselves deep, their tendrils threading through Letharia's flesh, feeding off her life force like parasites embedded in the veins of a god. If she cut too deep, she could sever something vital. If she hesitated, the barnacles might react defensively, releasing more toxins into the dragon's bloodstream. She had to be precise. Taking a steady breath, she made the first incision. The barnacle twitched violently, sensing the attack. Its tendrils spasmed, curling inward, trying to burrow deeper. Letharia roared. The sound rippled through the canyon, sending waves of dust cascading down the cliffs. The force of it nearly knocked Alara off balance, but she dug her heels into the ground, pressing forward. "You're doing great," she murmured, her voice low, steady. She wasn't sure if Letharia could even hear her through the pain, but it didn't matter. She wasn't going to stop. Another cut. The tendrils snapped, and the barnacle finally peeled away, its lifeless husk crumbling to dust the moment it hit the ground. Alara barely had time to breathe before she moved to the next one. By the time Alara had removed the fifth barnacle, her arms were aching, her fingers trembling from the effort. The parasitic growths fought her with every incision, twisting and writhing as if aware of their impending destruction. Each removal sent shockwaves of pain through Letharia's massive form, but the dragon never once moved away from her touch. She endured. Alara had never seen anything like it, this sheer unyielding strength. The sky above had darkened, the planet's dying sun slipping beneath the horizon. Shadows stretched long over the barren wasteland, and the cold began to creep in. Alara could see her breath now, faint wisps of vapor curling into the air as she worked. Only one barnacle remained, the largest. It was latched onto the base of Letharia's skull, its tendrils snaking into her spinal column, pulsating with a sickening rhythmic glow. Alara ran her scanner over it, lips pressing into a tight line. This one was different. The others had been draining energy, but this one was controlling it, sending out pulses of bioelectric interference, keeping Letharia in a perpetual state of weakness, a control node. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just biological torture. This was enslavement. Alara's jaw clenched. She had been in the outer colonies long enough to recognize cruelty when she saw it. This wasn't about politics, or strategy, or war. Whoever had done this to Lotharia had wanted her alive, but powerless, wanted her to feel her own downfall, to be conscious of her own destruction. Her hands curled into fists. That was not going to happen. She climbed onto Lotharia's massive shoulder, her boots finding purchase against the ridges of hardened scales. Carefully, she positioned herself near the base of the dragon's skull, hovering just inches away from the final barnacle. "Lotharia," she called out. The dragon's breath was weak, but steady. "Yes? This last one, it's different." Lotharia let out a slow exhale. "I know." Alara's fingers tightened around the scalpel. "It's going to fight back harder than the others." A pause. Then Lotharia murmured, "Then we will fight harder." Alara swallowed, nodded once. "All right then." She made the first cut. The reaction was immediate. The barnacle lashed out, sending a violent shockwave rippling through Lotharia's body. The dragon convulsed, her massive wings snapping outward as the energy pulsed through her nervous system, her tail slamming into the canyon wall with an earth-shattering crack. Alara clung to her, gritting her teeth against the raw force of the electrical backlash. The barnacle was trying to protect itself, its tendrils digging deeper, fighting desperately to hold on to its host. It wasn't just alive, it was aware. Alara's heart pounded. "Lotharia, hold on," she shouted, the wind whipping past her as the dragon's body arched violently beneath her. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Her scalpel moved fast and precise, slicing through the final tendril. The moment the connection snapped, the barnacle screamed, a piercing, unnatural shriek that sent a shockwave through the air. Then in an instant it withered, its dark, twisted form crumbling into nothing, and then silence. Lotharia's body slumped, her breathing ragged, but free. Alara slid down from her position, landing back on the ground, her entire body shaking. She barely had time to register what had happened before Lotharia's silver eyes locked onto her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Lotharia whispered, "I am myself again." Alara exhaled slowly, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Yeah," she murmured, "you are." The chains that had bound the queen for centuries had been broken, but their battle was far from over. The silence after the final barnacle fell away was heavier than the planet's dying air. Alara stood beside Lotharia's enormous frame, her pulse still hammering from the adrenaline. She wasn't sure how long she had been working. Hours? Days? Time had bled together in the haze of precision and exhaustion, of scalpel cuts and shockwaves, of the dragon's pain and the quiet, unshaken determination that had anchored Alara to her task. And now, at last, it was done. Lotharia shifted, the first true movement she had made under her own power since Alara had found her. The weight of centuries of suffering seemed to lift from her bones, and as the dragon queen pushed herself upright, dust and debris cascaded from her scales like falling stars. Her wings, long pinned against the cracked earth, unfurled, stretching wide as if testing their strength. Alara stumbled back, watching in awe as Lotharia rose to her full height. She was magnificent, even weakened, even scarred. There was nothing in the universe like her. Her silver eyes locked onto Alara, their depths reflecting the dim light of Draconis IV's twin moons. "You did not leave me," Lotharia murmured, her voice softer now, yet filled with an ancient strength that had long been buried beneath torment. "Even when it was impossible, even when I was nothing but a ruin." Alara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that truth settle into her chest. "I made you a promise," she said simply, "and I don't break those." Lotharia was silent for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then slowly, she bowed her head, a gesture of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of something far greater than words could contain. But the moment was shattered by a sound that made Alara's blood run cold. A distant hum. Then a deep, mechanical rumble echoing through the canyon. Alara turned sharply, her heart lurching. In the distance, beyond the rocky horizon, the dark silhouettes of ships were descending. Their forms were sleek, angular, gleaming with the cold light of technology far beyond anything human hands had crafted. They had come. Whoever had left Lotharia to die hadn't expected her to survive. And now, they were here to finish what they started. Lotharia's gaze darkened. "They come to silence me," she murmured, "to erase what they failed to destroy." Alara clenched her fists, her exhaustion forgotten. Not today. The ships hovered above them like predators, their engines humming with restrained violence. The insignia painted across their hulls was unmistakable, the crest of the Celestial Dominion, the ruling empire that had once hailed Letheria as their sovereign, and the same empire that had cast her aside. Alara barely had time to reach for her sidearm before a sharp, piercing voice cut through the air. Amplified by the ship's external speakers, Queen Letheria. The voice was smooth, polished like glass honed to a razor's edge. Alara's gut twisted with instinctive unease. "You have survived longer than anticipated," the voice continued. "That is unfortunate." Letharia's entire body tensed, her silver eyes narrowing. The wind around them shifted, stirring the dust as if the very air itself could feel the storm brewing within her. A bright energy beam shot down from one of the ships, materializing into the form of a holographic figure. A tall, regal Zentari woman stood before them, her presence radiating authority. Her features were sharp, her violet eyes cold. Alara knew who she was before she even spoke her name: High Chancellor Velexia, the one who had led the council that betrayed their own queen. Letharia's claws dug into the earth, a low growl rumbling from deep within her chest. "You dare to stand before me," she said, her voice like thunder on the verge of breaking. Valexia's expression did not shift. "We gave you a choice, Letheria, a peaceful end rather than an endless war." "You call this peace?" Letharia's wings snapped outward, and for the first time Alara felt power ripple through the air, like the gathering charge before a lightning strike. Velexia did not flinch. "You are an echo of the past," she said simply, "and I have come to ensure that past does not repeat itself." Alara stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "You abandoned her here like a piece of broken machinery," she snapped, "like she wasn't worth saving." Velexia turned her gaze to Alara, her expression shifting into something almost amused. "And you are the fool who thought to fix what should have remained broken." Alara's blood boiled. She knew exactly what kind of leader Velexia was. The kind that saw people, saw beings as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. The kind that built empires on graves and called it progress. Letheria lowered her head, placing herself between Alara and Velexia, her scales glistening now with a renewed, raw energy. "You will leave," the Dragon Queen commanded. Velexia tilted her head slightly. "Or what?" The storm answered for her. Lightning crackled through the sky, illuminating the shadows of the ships above. The air trembled with an unseen force, and Alara felt the sudden shift in gravity, as if the very planet itself was reacting to Letharia's rising power. And then, Letheria moved. Faster than anything her size should have been capable of, she launched into the air, her massive wings sending shockwaves through the ground. The force of her ascent ripped the air apart, sending Valexia's hologram flickering wildly before it collapsed into static. The ships barely had time to react. Letheria collided with the first vessel, her claws tearing through its hull as if it were nothing more than parchment. Her silver breath melting steel and circuitry in an instant. Explosions rocked the sky as the Dominion forces scrambled, their sleek ships twisting into evasive patterns, but it was too late. The queen they had once abandoned had returned in full force. Alara barely had time to dive behind a rock as another ship went down in flames, crashing into the canyon with a resounding boom. She pressed a hand to her comm. "Letheria, you can't fight them all." The dragon's voice rumbled through her earpiece. "Watch me." Alara's heart pounded. She had seen creatures fight for survival before. She had watched entire species claw their way back from extinction. But never had she seen vengeance take flight like this. Letheria was not just a queen reclaiming her throne. She was a force of reckoning, a storm that had been held back for far too long. And now, the galaxy was about to learn what happened when a dragon was denied her fire. Letheria moved like a storm given form, her wings cleaving through the air with an ancient power that sent shockwaves rolling through the battlefield. The Dominion ships scrambled, their pilots frantically trying to evade, but it was useless. The Queen had spent centuries in chains. Now, she tore through them with fire and rage. Alara could only watch from the ground, her heart hammering in her chest, as the night sky was lit by flames and lightning. She had seen battles before. She had treated the aftermath, patched up soldiers and civilians alike, trying to undo the wounds left by war. But she had never seen anything like this. Letheria wasn't just fighting. She was erasing the past that had tried to kill her. A Dominion warship broke formation, banking sharply as its ion cannons charged with a deadly hum. Alara's breath hitched. It was aiming right at Letheria. The moment stretched, frozen in time. Then, a blinding arc of silver energy erupted from Letheria's maw, striking the ship's core before it could fire. The vessel convulsed violently, its metallic skin splitting apart as white-hot energy devoured it from the inside. With a final, shuddering scream of metal, it detonated in a plume of fire and debris. Letheria did not stop. Her tail lashed out, collapsing another fighter into itself, sending its wreckage spiraling into the abyss below. She wove through the chaos, her silver eyes burning brighter with every ship that fell from the sky. The Dominion forces were breaking. One by one, the remaining ships faltered, their pilots hesitating. They had come expecting a dying relic, an easy execution. Instead, they had awoken a force that refused to be forgotten. A transmission crackled over the comm, cutting through the sounds of war. Valexia's voice was sharp, furious, but laced with something else now, something dangerously close to fear. Retreat. The word was clipped, reluctant, but absolute. The surviving Dominion vessels shifted into full withdrawal, their engines flaring as they fled toward the upper atmosphere. The remnants of their once mighty assault force vanished into the void, leaving nothing but the burning wreckage of their failure in their wake. Letheria hovered in the sky for a moment, her great wings outstretched, her silver gaze locked on the fleeing ships. She could have chased them, could have ended them all. But she did not. Instead, she turned slowly and descended. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. The ground shook as Letheria landed, her massive form casting long shadows against the burning horizon. The wind carried the scent of ash and metal, the remnants of the fleet that had come to erase her existence. She folded her wings, her body still radiating power, but her breath was measured now, no longer the ragged gasps of a creature fighting for survival. Alara stepped forward, her hands still trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what she had just witnessed. "You won," she murmured. The words felt too small for what had just happened, but they were the only ones that came. Letheria turned her silver gaze upon her, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "No," the Dragon Queen said softly. "I survived." Alara took a slow breath, absorbing those words. There was a difference. Letheria had not fought for vengeance. She had fought for her right to exist. Alara looked at the wreckage around them, at the still burning remains of what had once been unshakable authority. The Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, their word law, their power unchallenged. But tonight that had changed. Letheria was no longer a ghost of the past. She was a declaration to the future. Alara took another step forward, feeling the weight of her own choices pressing down on her shoulders. "What happens now?" she asked. Letheria exhaled, her breath sending a ripple through the dust that still clung to the air. "Now," the Queen murmured, "I take back what is mine." Alara felt the finality in those words, the quiet certainty of a ruler who had been denied her throne for far too long. But there was something else there too, something unspoken. Letheria had watched Alara fight beside her. She had felt the human's hands working tirelessly to save her life. She had seen compassion in a galaxy that had offered her nothing but cruelty. And now, as the last embers of battle flickered in the wind, she spoke again. "You did not have to save me, Alara Miles." Alara swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. "I couldn't leave you to die." Letheria regarded her for a long moment. Then, in a voice that rumbled with the weight of an oath unbreakable, she said, "Then I will not leave you either." Alara blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" The Dragon Queen lowered her head so that their gazes were level, so that Alara could see the truth in her eyes. "You saved me," Letheria said, "and now I will stand by your side." Alara felt her breath hitch. A Dragon Queen, the last of her kind, the ruler of a forsaken legacy, had just made a vow to a single human medic, not as a ruler, not as a god, but as an equal. The weight of that realization settled deep in Alara's soul, carving something permanent into the fabric of her being. She had come to this world expecting nothing more than ruins. Instead, she had found a queen reborn. And as the first streaks of dawn broke over the wasteland, one truth burned brighter than the wreckage around them. The galaxy would never be the same again. The stars above Draconis IV were clearer now, their light no longer obscured by the thick storm clouds that had loomed over the forsaken planet for centuries. It was as if the very fabric of the world had changed with the rise of Letharia. Alara stood at the edge of the canyon, staring at the wreckage of the Dominion fleet scattered across the landscape. Fires still smoldered in the ruins of their arrogance. The twisted remains of what had once been an indomitable force, now nothing more than ashes beneath the feet of the queen they had tried to erase. Letharia was beside her, her massive silver form illuminated by the soft glow of the planet's twin moons. The Dragon Queen's gaze was distant, fixed upon the void where the last of her enemies had fled. She had let them go. She had chosen to let them go. Alara had expected fury from her, a deep, unrelenting hunger for vengeance after centuries of imprisonment. But the look in Letharia's eyes was not wrath. It was something far more dangerous. It was resolve. "They will return?" the dragon murmured, her voice heavy with certainty. Alara exhaled, running a hand through her dust-streaked hair. "I know." Valexia wouldn't accept this defeat. The Chancellor had underestimated the Queen, thinking her nothing more than a ghost of a bygone age. But now she knew the truth. The Dominion's greatest mistake had not been exiling Letharia, it had been leaving her alive. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't have possibly foreseen, was that Letharia was no longer fighting alone. Alara turned to her, studying the battle-worn queen. Her wings were still torn in places, her body marked by the scars of the barnacles that had bound her for so long, but there was no sign of weakness. She was not a wounded relic of the past. She was a force of nature, awakening after too many years in chains. A long silence stretched between them before Alara finally spoke. "So what now?" Letharia's silver eyes flickered toward her, and Alara swore she saw the smallest trace of amusement beneath the weight of her unreadable expression. "Now," the queen repeated, her voice laced with something dark and knowing. "Now, we remind the galaxy why they once feared the dragons." A chill ran through Alara's spine, not from fear, but from the absolute certainty in those words. Letharia stretched her wings, testing them against the cold wind. The damage was healing, faster than Alara had expected, but even wounded, she was still a queen, still a warrior who had once ruled the stars. "They believe they have won," Letharia murmured, "that they rule unchallenged, that no force remains that can stand against them." She turned her gaze skyward, her silver eyes reflecting the endless void. "But I was never their prisoner, I was their warning." Alara had never been a soldier, never fought in a war beyond the battlefield of her medical tent. She had spent her life patching up the broken, not leading revolutions. But standing beside Letharia now, she realized she had already become part of something unstoppable. "You don't just want to take back your throne," Alara said, realization settling in. "You want to burn the entire system down." Letharia regarded her, silent for a moment, before giving a slow, deliberate nod. "My throne was never a gilded seat," she murmured. "It was the sky, the stars." She turned to Alara fully now, lowering her head until they were eye to eye. "And now, I will reclaim them, with or without a crown." A slow breath left Alara's lips. The weight of Letharia's words hung between them, heavy, inevitable. She had come here as a medic, an outsider. But now, she stood at the precipice of a war that would shake the very foundation of the galaxy itself. And she was standing beside a queen reborn. The journey away from Draconis IV was silent, but the air inside the ship was charged, thrumming with the anticipation of something unstoppable. The Odyssey lifted off from the scorched land, its thrusters cutting through the thin atmosphere as Alara sat in the cockpit, watching the planet shrink beneath them. Letharia was in the cargo hold, too large to fit in the main chambers, her presence too vast to be contained. Even through the reinforced walls of the ship, Alara could feel her there, feel the weight of the being she had freed. She wasn't sure where they were going. That didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. A transmission crackled through the ship's comm system. A secure channel, one that shouldn't have been able to reach them out here, in the desolate corners of space. Alara hesitated before patching it through. The holographic form of Velexia flickered to life before her, standing tall, regal, untouched by the failure that had cost her an entire fleet. Her violet eyes were unreadable, but there was something simmering beneath them, not just anger, but calculation. "Alara Miles," the Chancellor said smoothly. "I underestimated you." Alara leaned back, arms crossed. "Yeah, you did." Valexia's lips curled slightly, something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think this is a victory?" she asked. "That you've changed anything?" Alara didn't answer, because she knew the woman was already terrified of the answer. Velexia took a slow step forward, though it was just a projection, just a phantom of her presence. "We allowed the dragons to die for a reason," she murmured. "Do you think the Dominion will let you undo that?" Alara's grip tightened on the console. "You already know the answer to that," she said. Valexia's smirk faded. "You cannot save her." Alara leaned forward now, her voice cold, certain. "I already did." The Chancellor's image flickered, and for the first time, Alara saw it, the slightest hint of doubt, of something Velexia had not accounted for. A human standing beside a queen of fire and fury. A war she had thought already won, reignited from the dying embers. A mistake she could no longer erase. Letharia's voice rumbled through the ship, low and unshakable. Her words not just for Alara, but for Velexia, for the entire Dominion, for the galaxy itself. "I was forged in the darkness of your betrayal," the Dragon Queen said, her voice echoing through the halls. "And now I rise from the ruin you left behind." Valexia's expression hardened. Then, the transmission cut to black. The war had already begun. Alara turned off the comm system, exhaling as she pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her own heart. She was no longer just a medic. She was standing at the center of something far greater. Letharia's massive form shifted in the hold, the weight of her presence settling like an unchallenged force of nature. And for the first time, the galaxy would tremble once more at the sight of a dragon in flight.